All right, let's dive into Deuteronomy chapter 3. This time the Israelites are led by Moses, and they're right on the edge of the promised land.
It's a really interesting chapter because it's about more than just the battle, right?
Yeah.
It's about what happens after. Like, how do you divide up the territory? How do you deal with disappointment? And, oh, yeah, there's a giant's bed involved, too.
Okay, well, hold on. Let's back up a little.
Mm.
For our listeners who maybe haven't cracked open Deuteronomy lately, can you set the scene a bit more? Like, who are these Israelites?
Right. So the Israelites are this group of people who, according to their tradition, were enslaved in Egypt, and God, through Moses, led them out of slavery. And they've been wandering in the desert for 40 years, and they're finally on the verge of entering this land that God promised them.
Okay, so this promised land, it's a pretty big deal for them, right?
Huge deal. It's like their destiny, their homeland.
Okay, got it. So now in chapter 3, they're about to enter this land, but first, they've got to deal with a few obstacles, starting with, I guess, a giant.
Yeah, this is where we meet Og, the king of Bashan. And the text makes it clear this guy is the last of a fearsome race of giants.
They even talk about his bed.
Right, it was 9 cubits long, can you imagine?
9 cubits. Like, how big is a cubit again?
Well, it's about 1.5 feet, so we're talking about a bed over 13 feet long.
Whoa, okay. This guy was huge E.
And his kingdom, Bashan, it had all these fortified cities, so, this wasn't just some random encounter. The Israelites were facing a serious threat.
Right, a giant threat, literally. But they win.
They do. They defeat Og and conquer his land. And the text emphasizes that this victory isn't just about their military strength.
There's that spiritual element again. Right?
Exactly. It's God fulfilling a promise to deliver the land into their hands.
Okay, so victory achieved, but what happens next? I mean, they've got all this land now, right, from Og and from another king they defeated earlier, Sihon. So what do they do with it?
Well, this is where things get interesting. The land is divided up among a few of the tribes: Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh.
So it wasn't just a free-for-all, everyone grabbing what they could.
Not at all. There's actually a very clear system in place, a process for dividing the land fairly and making sure everything is organized.
Interesting. So even in this moment of victory, they're already thinking about fairness and order.
Exactly. They're establishing systems that benefit everyone involved, which, it makes you think, right, about how we approach things in our own lives. Like, how do we make sure things are fair, whether it's at work, in our communities, even just at home with our families? Do we have systems in place? Are we thinking about equity?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to just focus on the win, but what happens after is just as important.
Absolutely. And that's something this chapter really highlights. It's not just about achieving the goal, but about what you do with that achievement, how you build on it, how you share it, how you make sure it lasts.
Right. Because the victory is just the beginning, isn't it?
Exactly. And speaking of what happens next, there's actually this unexpected twist in the story. Yeah, so Moses, the one who's led the Israelites this whole time, through the desert, through the battles, everything, he expresses this desire to cross into the promised land himself.
Oh, wow. So after all that, he doesn't get to see it for himself. That's got to be tough.
Right. He actually pleads with God to let him go.
What does God say?
God says no.
Oh, man. I can't even imagine how crushing that must have been for Moses. I mean, to be so close after leading everyone there.
It's got to be one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the whole story. But here's the thing. The text describes Moses accepting this decision with humility and obedience.
So he doesn't rage against God. He doesn't question it. He just accepts it.
He does, and it's a really powerful moment. It shows this incredible trust in something larger than himself, in God's plan. Sometimes we don't get what we want, even when we think we deserve it, but maybe, just maybe, there's a bigger picture, a different path that we're meant to follow.
That's a tough lesson, but I guess it's an important one.
Definitely. And then the narrative shifts to preparing for the future. God chooses Joshua to be Moses' successor.
So they've got a new leader?
Yep. And God instructs Moses to mentor Joshua to get him ready for this huge responsibility.
Wow. So even while they're celebrating this victory, settling into this new land, they're already thinking about what's next.
Exactly. It highlights this really important theme, the importance of mentorship and succession planning. It's not enough to just achieve a goal. You have to make sure things continue, that the next generation is prepared.
And that applies to so much more than just conquering lands, right? I mean, we see this in businesses, in organizations, even just in families, passing on traditions, skills, knowledge.
Absolutely. investing in those who come after us, that's how we create a legacy. It's about more than just us. It's about future.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that idea that reaching the destination, that's just one part of the journey. The real work, the real growth, it often comes in the aftermath.
That's a great point. And honestly, I think it's something we overlook a lot, especially in our kind of goal-obsessed world.
Right. We're all about the what, but we forget about the then what.
Exactly. But like this chapter in Deuteronomy, it really highlights that then what, right?
It does. And it's saying that the then what is just as important, maybe even more important. It's about taking that achievement, that victory, and building on it.
So it's not just about beating the giant or getting to the promised land. It's about what happens next. It's about how you actually use that land, share it, make sure it lasts.
Exactly. And I think that idea, it resonates. It doesn't matter what your background is or what you believe. We all face challenges. We all have goals. And we all, I think, have a responsibility to think about what we leave behind.
Our own individual journeys, they're all connected in a way. What we do today, it affects the people who come after us.
It does. And that's a pretty powerful thought, don't you think?
Definitely. Well, hey, thanks for joining me for this deep dive into Deuteronomy chapter 3. It's been a fascinating look at, victory and fairness and even acceptance. And of course, preparing for the future.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We hope this has given you some things to think about, maybe even inspired you to think about your own then what's moments. Until next time.